In this video, I want to show how you can create a set of drop-down menus um, where the second drop-down menu is dependent on what's in the first drop-down menu. So, for instance, if I were to change this expense category to, for instance, office expenses, this is going to change to office supplies. And if I change it to automobile expenses, notice this is an invalid range now because this needs to be chosen from the automobile expenses. So let's see how we can do this, having a secondary drop-down menu that is controlled by this. First of all, over on our categories page, we've just listed all of our categories. All of our automobile expenses, all of our donations, and some of these don't have subcategories. So in this case, what I've done is just said there's no details, and then actually back here, if that's the case, you don't have any details, I've used conditional formatting so that can kind of show up and alert you that there aren't any other drop downs on this, and you could leave those blank if you wanted, but I was wanting to have them filled. So here's the first thing I do is I take whatever is in transactions D2. So I'm looking here, transactions D2. Well, first of all, let's take a look at how we set this data validation. This data validation is equal to categories. Well, categories is a named range, so let's take a look at that. We have a named range called categories, and categories is everything that's in this tab, categories, A:(A). So in that case, I can add to this and it will automatically create more drop-down menus. So for instance, if I wanted to add a new category called, zebras, and zebras are, just to keep it in alphabetical order, zebras have, again, no details. It's just a new category. Notice as soon as I do that, back here on transactions, I should see zebras. So that makes that a dynamic list, and we'll go ahead and get rid of that. And then you can see zebras is gone. So we can keep that as a dynamic category. I'm using two named ranges, categories and details. Categories is everything in, you can see categories A:(A). So categories is this, and details is categories A1 to B957. And actually, I see that I must have added a row there because that should be B1000. So let me just quickly change that. Great. So those are my categories. Those are my details. So I'm using the categories as my drop-down menu. Again, as we saw in our data validation, that's going to be my drop-down menu. That's just copied down all 1,000 rows. Okay. Then what we're doing over here, categories, we're using the equals transactions to pull in whatever is in whatever's in D2. So whatever I select here shows up here. And then this is where our query comes in. We're transposing the query. So we're querying details. Details is everything here. We're querying details where select B where A equals C1. So I'm writing a query, and normally a query would be written vertically. So what I'm doing here is transposing the query. So on each row, I have all of the lists of I have the list of things that are in automobile expenses and office expenses and so forth. Then what I'm doing over here to make this populate, I'm doing a data validation where I'm saying categories D1 to K1. Now you would expand that out, and notice you can copy this. You can copy this data validation down because I've only locked the columns. I did not lock the rows. So when you take a look at row 2 and look at my data validation, it's D2 to K2, which is going to give me anything that's from D over to K. Now that allows me to add a few other kinds of automobile expenses. So for instance, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 automobile expenses, and I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I could expand this out and have multiple other kinds of automobile expenses. So this is dynamic and can grow. I think the biggest problem we might have with this is keeping this formula D2 and not ending up with any issues if we were to insert rows. I haven't tested that out, but this does allow me to come here, choose equipment, and then this drop down menu is computer equipment. Right now this drop down menu is blank, and if I choose meals, this is no details. So this is a way to have your secondary detailed drop-down menu dependent on what's in the category. Another way I had originally set this up was to actually, instead of putting everything over here, I had a categories page, and I was then hiding some rows in here and letting this query right across in some hidden grouped rows. But I figured this is easier to let you just put everything on the secondary categories page and be able to have your secondary drop-down menu.